I just have to begin by acknowledging and saying how grateful I am to the Borlaug and Ron families for bringing us together. This is such an important and unique gathering. It happens every year. I don't want to take that for granted. I'm joined by a great set of panelists here. Lindiwe Sibanda, who's the board chair of the CGIAR, Gerardine Mukeshimana, who is the vice president of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and Cynthia Rosenzweig. Who is Cynthia? That's, oh yes, last year's World Food Prize laureate with Goddard and with AgMep, as you'll learn in just a few minutes. So, some years ago, quite a few years ago, I gave a lecture in Australia called the Crawford Fund Lecture. And as I recall, I started off that lecture by saying that I thought there were three things that we all know and that we all agree upon. Number one is that the current agricultural system will not remain as is forever. Number two, we're going to need to produce much more new food in the future. And number three, we're not acting as if number one and number two are true. Well, since then, some things have changed. The numbers of food insecure has actually risen. The crises have become more frequent. The causes behind food insecurity are larger in number and perhaps more intractable than they've ever been. They don't seem to anyone, I think, to be one-off or temporary. And you can go back to the late 1970s to find a single month, in which the monthly average temperature for the global average temperature for the planet was not exceeding the 20th century average for that month. So in the face of this, and in this context, business as usual is really not the appropriate response. It's not going to give us the amount of change needed to reverse the course we're on and to avoid disaster. It's not that incremental change is bad. Sometimes it's necessary, but it's just that it's not enough. We, I think, need to be more aspirational. We need to think more boldly and act more boldly. And we need some game-changing developments in agriculture and food security. The one thing that I would change about the talk that I gave to the Crawford Fund years ago would not be number one or number two. It would actually be number three, because I think we are, in fact, beginning to act as if number one and number two are true. And I want to simply give you this morning one example of that. Earlier this year, the U.S. government launched what it calls the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils. We use the English acronym VAX. It's co-sponsored by the African Union, by the Food and Agriculture Organization, and by the U.S. government. On our side, principally by the State Department and USAID. It's premised on the understanding that food security fundamentally depends on fertile soils and adapted crops. You just don't have food security without those two things. Poor, degraded soils and unadapted crops will never, never provide for food security. In fact, even today's production levels would be unsustainable. The Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, VAX, is initially focused on Africa, though I think the approach is applicable other places. With the soils part of it, we're building on Feed the Future space-to-place work and trying to provide better data and information both for governments and all the way down to the farm level. So governments can make better decisions about land use planning and farmers can make better decisions about farm management. In other words, we're trying to answer four questions: where to plant, what management system to use, and how to apply it in a given season. With the crops work, we are focused quite clearly on nutrition, not just calories. We know that staples alone cannot provide for balanced nutrition. This requires, as a good agricultural system and good soil health would, to access to a wide variety of foods and the micronutrients and macronutrients that they provide for agriculture. Over-reliance on just a few staples, often just one, is risky, and in the best of years, it cannot provide for adequate and balanced nutrition for all. Fortunately, Africa is rich in traditional and indigenous crops, which have suffered from years and years, one could say centuries, of underinvestment. This is highlighted in the African Union's Common Position on Food System, which repeatedly refers to the importance of their indigenous crops and the fact that they've been underinvested in. So expanding the spotlight and our investments in these kinds of crops can unlock the potential to improve nutrition, rebuild soils, support local communities and culture, and strengthen resilience. And I would point out that many of these crops are primarily tended by women, and so we think the benefits will flow inordinately to women and to children, and thus really aid in combating the terrible problem of stunting. As I mentioned, we're working with the African Union, with FAO, but also the work inside the U.S. government in this regard will be done through the Agency for International Development, particularly the Feed the Future program. We're collaborating with the African Orphan Crops Consortium, with the Columbia Climate School and AgMIP, which you'll hear about in a moment, with Havos AI, with the CGIAR, and internally, other than USAID, of course, with Treasury and USDA. And through all of these partners, we instituted a three-step process. The first step was focused on nutrition. If you're going to make investments in food systems, and particularly in plant breeding, and particularly in these indigenous crops, the place to start is to ask yourself, well, what are the crops that have the most potential for providing the best, most nutrition? As I mentioned, Africa is rich in indigenous crops. There are over 300 of them. We took that list and we basically narrowed it down to 60. They're all crop categories: cereals, roots and tubers, legumes, vegetables, fruits, nuts, tree crops. And crops that are growing in each of the 5 African Union subregions of Africa. Our goal was to say, well, where are the highest potential crops that can provide good nutrition year-round for all segments of society? The second step, then, is to take that list of the most promising crops for adding nutrition and ask yourself, well, how are they going to do in the climates, the future climates of Africa? We've been lucky enough to have from the very beginning, the collaboration, the partnership with Cynthia Rosenzweig. She'll mention what she's been doing in just a moment. And we've had the support, the strong support throughout this entire process of the Rockefeller Foundation, who's funded the entire process. And next month, we will have a meeting at the Rockefeller Foundation to look at those 60 crops and look at the modeling work that Cynthia and her colleagues have done to inform us about which of the 60 will have the most likelihood of success in a future climate. I think this is really the first time that on this kind of scale that anyone has gone through this process of being so rational, frankly, about making future investments in plant breeding and improvement efforts. The third step, I mentioned this was a 3-step process, was to establish a multi-donor funding mechanism to provide the kind of ongoing funding and support that these types of efforts on soils and crops are going to require. And Gerardine from IFAD will tell you about that. The fund has been established under IFAD in Rome. This doesn't mean that we or anyone else is advocating that we abandon our work on the major crops. I used to serve on the Board of Trustees of CIMMYT. In fact, I chaired the committee at CIMMYT that oversaw the research program at CIMMYT, and I must say I'm quite happy that it was during a period when CIMMYT was working on its drought-tolerant maize. So you're not going to find me saying anything bad about research and the major staple crops. And I guess if I did, CIMMYT would probably excommunicate me, but I don't intend to go there. What we're proposing is that we add to this attention and take advantage of the tremendous potential that these crops have from a benefit to cost ratio and in terms of human health and benefits to the environment. These crops have names. They're crops like pigeon pea and grass pea and lob and African yam bean, Bambara groundnut, all legumes, great for the soil. There's spider plant, moringa, African eggplant, African custard apple. So there are a lot of crops that maybe some of you haven't heard of, but there are also some crops that you have heard of that still could benefit from a good bit more research, and that would be crops like sorghum and finger millet and fonio and okra and cowpea. This program, VAX as we're calling it, it does not solve all problems, but it addresses two fundamental prerequisites for food security: the need for good soils and the need for adapted and nutritious crops. VAX, I believe, has the potential for being both transformational in African food systems and intergenerational. To be that, the technical work needs to be performed at a really high professional level, and of course it needs to succeed. Norman Borlaug could have told us a lot about that, because not only was he a scientist, but if you read one of the several biographies of Norman Borlaug, you'll find out that he was a great pragmatist and knew how to put institutions together and knew how to make things work. We're going to need those same set of skills for this. But something else has to happen for this effort to succeed, something that's maybe even a little bit more fundamental, and that is that the discourse about food security needs to change. And it needs to recognize three things, I think. First is that we need to protect and recapitalize our soils. The second is that we need to organize our food systems around providing good nutrition, balanced nutrition year-round to everyone. And the third thing is that we need to ensure that all of our crops, major and minor, including those nutrition-rich indigenous crops in Africa that we've effectively ignored for decades, that all of these crops realize their potential in African farming and food systems. If this is going to succeed, it will not be because a few organizations and individuals have come together to try to make it succeed. It's going to take you in the audience helping us, changing the conversation, changing the discourse. So I ask you to join us. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Cynthia Rosenzweig from the Agricultural Model Intercomparison and Improvement Project, known as AgMIP. And last year at the Borlaug Dialogue in 2022, I met Dr. Cary Fowler. And in the preceding year, in the following year from this interceding year, we and a wonderful team across Africa and experts everywhere have begun to work on the VAX project. So I want to share with you just a very few slides. I'm from the science side and like to show some actual data that serves as the foundation for the VAX project program change. I think we need a different adjective for not noun for what VAX really is. I want to acknowledge and highlight and share that this work is done with, is co-led by Dr. Dillis McCarthy at the University of Ghana. and her team that includes nutritionists, crop modelers, breeders, economists, all the things, all the disciplines that need to be brought together on the ground to advance the kind of transformational change that Dr. Fowler just described. So here we go. Here's the vision for adapted crops and soils. As we know, it focuses on underutilized traditional and indigenous crops. We're now calling these opportunity crops. And as Dr. Fowler said, what we on the technical side are doing is assessing which opportunity crops are both highly climate resilient and nutritious. And it's very exciting to share with this audience here at the Borlaug Dialogues is that what AgMIP is doing is creating 30 new crop models for these crops that haven't had not only the breeding work, but also the modeling work, so that we can project into the future with climate change and include those nutritional aspects which are also affected by changing carbon dioxide concentrations and climate. On the left of this slide is the change in temperature that Africa, the continent of Africa, has experienced already. So you can see that climate change is no longer something in the future. It is happening now. And that's what the map is showing with those oranges and yellows and oranges and brown. So Dr. Fowler mentioned some of the crops. I won't go through all these and read them, but the important thing here is, as he mentioned, that the crops are not only in the cereals and oilseeds, which of course are very, very important, those staple crops, but that really equally the selection of crops has been with the legumes, with the roots and tubers, and very importantly for dietary health, fruits and vegetables. Now we also, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's benchmark crops. So we compare how these crops are doing with the current crops that have had a lot of genetic development and crop modeling development, such as tomato, cassava, maize, and soy. So that's how we're setting up the scientific assessments of these crops. But the list is very exciting, I think. These are the ones that we're modeling. And we held this wonderful process, having the breeders weigh in, having the crop modelers weigh in, the nutrition scientists weigh in to actually come to this group. So then, to answer the question of which of these crops and how are they doing on climate resilience to the changes of, in particular, extreme events increasing, et cetera. On the left, we have the projections for the 2050s with how maize reacts to the climate. And what we see in that left-hand map is a lot of yellows and oranges, which mean decreases in yield. On the right, we see how fonio, which is a millet in the millet family, crop in West Africa, and how does fonio react to the climate change projections in the 2050s. And we see in its area, it is responding in a more resilient way to climate change with the yellows and greens. What we're doing basically is, as we go forward, is filling in this map of Africa with African colleagues in each region, each country, and in each region to find which crops are more climate resilient across the entire continent. We don't only look at what's happening to the productivity. Now we're switching just on to look at teff, which is a major crop in East Africa. And here, what you're seeing in the spider diagram in the middle is that we're not only considering what's happening to the productivity, That's the blue indicators. We call these the adaptation indicators. But the red are the nutritious components, the components of a nutritious diet. And seeing, as Dr. Fowler said, this is actually where the project and where VAX started. For each crop, FAO has done a fantastic job bringing forward the nutrient compositions of each crop. Then in the green, we also, for each crop, assess the genetic resources. How many accessions have there been? What kind of breeding program has occurred? What are the investments in those crops so far? This is the kind of knowledge that will help us to truly provide the basic foundational knowledge about the opportunity crops so they can really play their role in the vision for adapted crops and soils. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I am Gerardine. I'm from IFAD, so I'm going to be speaking on how IFAD is going to be a partner in VAX. So VAX initiative is strongly aligned with IFAD. IFAD stands for International Fund for Agricultural Development. So the VAX is aligned with IFAD's primary focus on climate adaptation and building resilience for small-scale farmers. These aspects are pivotal in achieving transformation of sustainable rural transformation. A significant development took place when IFAD Executive Board unanimously approved the inclusion of VAX Multi-Donor Trust Fund as a key pillar of IFAD Rural Resilience Program last September. This decision unifies several key initiatives under a common coordination framework. It is a disheartening fact that only 3% of the public climate finance is directed toward food systems, despite them accounting for 1/3 of all global emissions. Additionally, merely 2% of the global climate finance reaches small-scale farmers, indigenous communities, and local farmers in the global south. VAX is envisioned as a sustainable multilateral platform that will mobilize funding from a wide range of partners to implement these activities. These activities will be mainstreamed into IFAD portfolio of loans and grants with a specific focus on adopting nutritious crops and enhancing soil health. This in turn will help foster a more resilient and food secure future. VAX-focused activities will be woven into new projects, designs, and also they could be allocated as additional or top-up funding for existing IFAD investments. VAX will offer the opportunity to significantly expedite the strengthening of crop adaptation and soil health in IFAD's interventions. By doing so, we can substantially increase the number of small-scale farmers across Africa who benefit from these activities and investments. Currently, IFAD dedicates 55% of its core resources to sub-Saharan Africa, so IFAD projects will be providing a good vehicle to VAX activities. Our work will place a significant emphasis on identifying and investing in plant breeding programs at the local level. These programs can focus on crop outlined in the nutritious crop list compiled by VAX Initiative and reviewed by FAO. Such activities could encompass the implementation of initial steps in identifying and conserving local genetic diversity, promoting participatory process required for developing locally adapted species. Investments in supply chains to deliver nutritious varieties to farmers and consumers will be instrumental. VAX investments in a seed system can enhance the supply of improved seeds, strengthen local seed systems, and improve extension services for training farmers on new crops and varieties, along with off-farm and farmer-to-farmer management of plant genetic resources. Funding can also support marketing and demand-side interventions, including processing, consumer research, and promotion of new nutritious varieties. We should explore opportunities to develop direct partnerships with farmers' organizations working in these areas and promote local markets for very local species. At the farm level, we will work on systems that address scale limitations on soil map and other geospatial information by incorporating farmers' knowledge and observations. This approach will allow small-scale farmers to harness the benefits of precision agriculture and soil conservation techniques, significantly improving crop production and soil health across their farms. Developing and increasing the use of knowledge systems that provide the best available knowledge and information inputs for key land use and management decision will be crucial. We will provide support at regional and national levels for knowledge systems that enable policymakers to make informed land use decisions, taking into account long-term impacts on agricultural productivity. IFAD is ready to collaborate with all VAX partners to initiate implementation and deliver the urgently needed results on the ground, particularly in Africa. I would want to express my deepest gratitude for this opportunity to address you, and IFAD is eagerly ready and anticipating a collaboration of all of us on this vital initiative. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm happy to be back Mainstage today to give a testimony on how personally and with the institutions I work with, we have responded to the charge by Dr. Norman Borlaug to take it to the farmer. But more exciting, I'm happy to give a testimony on how we are honoring his dying wish to take it to Africa. Yesterday, I stood alongside with Dr. Bram of CIMIT to talk about how Masagro has gone from Mexico to Africa. And today, I'm excited to stand here to give a testimony on how VAX, the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils in Africa, has been championed by our own special envoy for global food security, U.S. State Department, Ambassador Cary Fowler, who planted the seed. Thank you for taking it to Africa. On behalf of CGIAR, where I sit as System Board Chair, I've told my colleagues, if CGIAR does not win in Africa, we are not going to win anyway. And I want to say we are honored to have two co-chairs drawn from Africa working with the largest public global research entity, CGIAR, who are co-chairs. On behalf of my colleague, Namokolo Kovic, who is a guru in nutrition, we are chairing VAX. She chairs the nutrition component and I chair the climate component. Of course, led by our own laureate, who does the hands-on with thousands of our own researchers doing the climate modeling. It's an exciting journey for Africa. It's an exciting journey for the world, because we are now fully invested in what Secretary Vizlak said yesterday. We can no longer do food security without addressing nutrition security. We can no longer do food without looking at the environment and looking at ecosystem resilience. We are fit for purpose at CGIAR. We've come together as 13 centers under the banner of one CGIAR with a common strategy and a common vision to transform food systems, land systems, and water systems to deliver science and innovations in the face of climate change. So there couldn't be a better partnership for CGIAR than what we have in VAX. VAX is essentially addressing our strategy, both in dealing with the climate-adapted, nutritious crops, healthy soils for a food-secure and an Africa that can feed the world. At CGIAR, we view VAX as the transformative tool with immense potential to revolutionize approaches to global food system challenges. It is clear that we need both climate-adapted, nutritious crops and healthy soils to achieve a food-secure future. This is fully in alignment with our strategy. The achievements of VAX is dependent on commitment to systems transformation, from harnessing crop diversity through breeding and gene banks to incentivizing diverse farming systems, better soil and water management, and putting the right policies in place to create an enabling environment for markets and job creation. That is why the African Union is championing VAX. That is why, through FAO, we are working globally, and through IFAD, we have the full support to take it to the farmer and to take it to Africa. VAX is perfectly in alignment with the systems thinking enshrined in the CGIAR's research and innovation strategy. We have the sophisticated modeling and data-driven insights that are central to VAX and are also an essential component in CGIAR's toolbox. And VAX cross-sector collaboration is also very much in line with CGIAR's own partnership strategy and the model that we use in bringing together diverse stakeholders, including researchers, climate modelers, crop breeders, nutrition experts, and policymakers. Just one example of how CGIAR is already working with US partners and partners in the field to deliver in line with VAX objectives is our USAID-funded Great Lakes Accelerated Innovation Delivery Initiative Rapid Delivery Hub, which is funded through AID-I. This project is implemented by two of our research centers, CIMIT and IITA, and operates in Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. It aims to address high poverty and malnutrition in the Great Lakes region by efficiently integrating agricultural and nutritional practices and technologies. The project has already reached 1.5 million farmers in its first year. It has promoted 61 new and improved maize and legume seed varieties, working with the private sector and playing a significant role in making improved seed more accessible to our farmers. You heard the examples yesterday from the farmers that were part of the Masagro panel. We have farmers in Africa who can give similar testimonies. The expectation is that the seed will be planted on over 500,000 hectares of land in the coming season of 2023-24. This will significantly improve food and nutrition security in Africa. When it comes to soil health, there can be no sustainable development agenda that does not have soil health at the center. And we are excited that through VAX, we are dealing exactly with that agenda. We have shown it as CGIAR that 33% reduction in soil erosion occurs when we have promoted the adoption of conservation agriculture practices. There's also been a showcase of a 30% decrease in runoff, mitigating water-induced soil erosion. When we speak to adapted crops, I cannot help but remember my own grandmother, who on her 1 hectare plot was able to feed the soil, feed the family, and feed her neighbors because of the diversity on the farm. There is great and unrealized opportunity in traditional and indigenous crops that VAX is going to unearth. As climate change poses challenges to agriculture, these crops may have the inherent adaptations that make them more resilient to changing environmental conditions. Traditional indigenous crops can contribute to more resilient food systems by diversifying agricultural practices. Promoting dependence on a limited set of crops is dangerous, and what we are offering in this VAX offering is that this promotion not only addresses food security, but preserves cultural diversity. It supports local identities. This is the cultural relevance that VAX is bringing to Africa. By introducing new heritage crops and diversifying our agriculture, we are expanding the pantry. We are no longer calling them orphans, but opportunity crops of today and the future. Let me speak to innovation in genetics. Spanning gene banks, crop breeding, and seed systems has been the cornerstone of us at CGIAR. With CGIAR's 33 collaborative networks for crop breeding, where we engage over 1,200 partners across 135 countries, dedicated to creating and providing enhanced varieties of 21 crops already and forages to small-scale farmers. We have 9 gene banks safeguarding 30 crops and 3,000 species, and we annually distribute over 50,000 samples that are shared upon request. CGIAR's micronutrient-fortified crops have improved the nutrition of over 20 million people in low-income countries. Almost half of the world's wheatland is sown to varieties that come from research by CGIAR scientists with over 10,000 staff worldwide. We are therefore excited as CGIAR to be championing this VAX journey. As always, we don't do it alone. We do it with our partners at country level, at regional level, and globally. From our perspective at CGIAR, VAX is a catalyst for positive change in agriculture. Its potential spans from informing evidence-based decision-making to inspiring the agricultural leaders of tomorrow. VAX is a wonderful chapter for the world. VAX is a wonderful chapter for Africa. VAX is the beginning of many chapters to come. Come with us on the journey to feed Africa and to fill the world. I thank you.